It's go time. Let's talk about this. So hopefully everybody saw my email. If you didn't, make sure you're reading that at some time in the very short future. So we did the TAs and I, part of why homework 2 interviews they got a little bit deprioritized because we had to do some surgery on the course. I wanted to get opinions from my TAs and talk about this with them. So we've made some big changes to the schedule of the course, and we're effectively going to have a makeup week this week. So a lot of the class is very far behind. The class is just getting crushed this semester, more so than most semesters. I presume it's because it's online only. So we are going to make some accommodations. I'm not removing any material in the course. We're still covering everything. You still have to do all the assignments and all the lecture questions. But I rearranged the schedule to give us a little bit of a break here, because I know this is a tougher semester being remote. But it's at the point where you got to suck it up. You just got to do your work. But I am going to give you some time to kind of catch up. So to that end, I moved what used to be week 12, I moved up to week 7 to this week. So these topics, Git, GUI, MVC, MySQL, I'm not going to say these aren't important topics. I'm not going to say that you can't learn these or you shouldn't learn these. But they do pertain to your project contribution, and most importantly, they don't have any lecture questions attached to them. So we have 1 week with 0 lecture questions, so you can you can get caught up on all of the old lecture questions. We got 15 of the questions out there. Half of the total questions are released, so you can start working on those three learning objectives, those 15 questions. Homework 3 is released. We don't have to talk about that quite yet. The part of this is everything else got pushed back a week, so the deadline for homework 3 got pushed back as well. We're not going to think about that till next week, unless you're already caught up. So we're going to cover these topics. If we don't get to everything, I'll just cover them later in the semester during review week or some other time. So I'm not too concerned about getting through all the material. What I really want to do is get everybody caught up. So this is your chance. This is your time to get caught up. If the semester's been completely overbearing and crushing your soul, this is your chance for the course to kind of stop crushing you. I'm letting up a bit for 1 week. This is your time to, get your crap together and start working without getting, every time you finish a lecture question, I give you a new one. We're going to pause that for a second. So this is your chance. If you're not caught up by the end of this week, the course is going to move on, and, it's going to be 15 more lectures with lecture questions right after this. So make sure you're caught up by the end of this week, at least to the best of your ability. Get working, do what you got to do. For those of you who are very behind, myself and the TAs have been reaching out to you. If you're extremely behind still at the end of Friday, if you don't even take advantage of this week, I'm going to start taking away makeup opportunities. You're not going to get, chance after chance to do makeup interviews and makeup labs and stuff. I'm just going to say, look, you're giving up on me, I'm giving up on you. That's the way it is. If you haven't gotten emails from us beyond the one that I sent, then that doesn't quite pertain to you, at least not yet. So keep doing what you're doing and catch up your work. You didn't receive... I'm so tired of students saying this. Check your email regularly. I sent you an email. Just check. If you don't see it, look a little harder, or at worst, search for my email address. There's so many students claim to not get emails from the TAs. Just check your email. It's not that hard. That said, for those of you who have sent me emails, I'm probably sounding like a hypocrite there. I will get to your emails. I am behind on my own emails, but it's not like I'm missing them completely. I just have a lot of work that I'm doing. Okay, so to this end, there's a Piazza post. It was referenced in that email asking for review topics. Let me just absolutely make sure. It's the number 2 pinned post right now called Lecture Review Topic Suggestion. Please use this to let me know what I should review this week. And I'll start off with review. Right now, the top post, it only has 2 votes. I'll call them upvotes. Piazza calls it helpful, but we're using it a little different than Piazza wants right now. So only 3 students asked for this, so I'm not if you're not going to use this Piazza post, I'm not gonna bother too much. But I will go over this one just to show you all that I am paying attention to this. Please, if you're behind, this drives me insane to like no end. The whole class is behind. Not the whole class, but most of you are behind. And some of you extremely far behind. And complain about the difficulty of the course and everything. But then when I give you a chance to say, hey, let me know where you're struggling and I'll help you, a total of maybe 7 students have responded to that post. You got to let me know where you need help. If there's a lecture that I covered that I explained really crappy and it didn't make sense, let me know so I can do something about that. If you don't even let me know, then you're just complaining, and there's nothing, that's on you. But if there's something on me, let me know. Hey, what's up, Ogrudge? Yeah, professor and TAs, make it label for TAs as well. Or just check your mail. Like, how do you miss an email? I don't understand that. I can see being late to an email. Maybe you were busy. I do that all the time. But actually missing an email? I don't buy that. And I get that so much. My TA never emailed me for an interview. Bullshit. Like, just check your email. Anyway, that's just going to frustrate me. Takes you a while to process information. So maybe this week maybe that's what I'm seeing. Maybe you're not, as a whole, the class isn't responding to that post just because it's taking a while. I'll buy that. That makes sense. So maybe this week is exactly what you need, just a week to digest and stuff. All right, so the one post that did get some upvotes, where's my mouse? Let's talk about this. It's requesting LO1 quiz, talking about stack and heap, and JSON. I might punt JSON to the next lecture if I cover that. But let me do the LO1 quiz. And actually the second one, the second post, most upvoted post with just one upvote, is polymorphism and inheritance. Oh, actually I did change the example I want to do. I guess I'm not touching polymorphism and inheritance. Maybe I will do JSON. But at the very least, I'm doing LO1 lab quiz. I want to go through this example. This is the example that I used last semester to talk about the heap specifically, but a little bit of stack as well. So I want to go through this example and walk through with the debugger and explain to you mostly what I want to focus on is how to use the debugger so that you can practice with any program for this. Stuck on alliteration? Yeah, but don't throw it in Twitch chat. Go to that Piazza post so I know, because I have to prepare anything that you want reviewed. I have to come into lecture prepared to do that. I can't just go over alliteration on the spot like that. You got to let me know. That's even one of my examples in the post is alliteration, because I think that is where a lot of students are stuck. But you got to let me know. Yeah, it's Bird Box time. No lecture question day. Come on, this is what I'm talking about. I know this is a hard semester and a hard course, but if you're paying that little attention, come on, man. There's nothing I can do for you at that point. No lecture question today? What have I been talking about for the past 10 minutes and in my email? Check your email. Pay attention to lecture. Do anything. It's yeah, I am upset. Do it small. Like, you can't just use the excuse that remote learning is hard. You can't just keep using that excuse. At some point, you just gotta suck it up and do something. Yeah, you gotta work with me here. I can't just magically get you to understand everything and get all your homework done. So anyway, let's go through this. I'm gonna run it in the debugger. So I have my breakpoint set on the first line of main. And I'm going to run the debugger. I'm going to click this arrow and click the debug this program. So I'm going to run this with the debugger, which is going to show me all of the values as this program is running. So I can see everything that's going on the stack and the heap. And I want to make it clear what I want to focus on with this example is how to read the debugger in terms of the stack and the heap. Because I use it quite a bit, but it's in a different format and different things than my lecture slide examples. So I want to show you how the lecture slide examples relate to the debugger. So then you can go through any program you've written, any of your homework programs, any examples in this repo, and use those as examples to study the stack and the heap. So let's go through this one at a time, one line at a time. I haven't processed homework 2 yet. I'm going to do that tonight so I can get the extension decisions out, but I haven't looked at homework 2 yet. Partly because, you can tell the mood I'm in right now. I don't want to look at a new chunk of data because I'm just going to get more upset. But I will look at it tonight. Wait, what? I'm not behind on this class either, but I still needed this. Oh, yeah, you're not behind. Yeah, and there are students, so those of you who are working at it and not too far behind, even if you're completely caught up, this can give you a breather of 116 and help you focus on other parts of your life instead of just doing 116 nonstop. Up 10 people than usual. Still only 82 people here. So you might not even be the ones I have to be mad at. It's the ones who aren't even here. So let's go through this one at a time. Which at that point, come on, there's no excuse if you're not even watching lecture. There's no excuse. I'm at least if I don't accomplish anything else this week, I'm going to clear my conscience that I'm giving you this chance. And if people aren't even watching these lectures, I know like 2 weeks from now, somebody's going to be like, what was that makeup week thing all about? I'm just catching up on the lectures. Well, nothing for you, I guess. So with this example, we have 2 classes. We'll see the code a bit as we go into the code during the execution of this program. But bird, it has a couple of state variables and a method. And box has two constructor parameters, which are both birds. And then one method which calls methods on the bird. So we have a few layers of method calls and a little bit of interactions between these objects and between these classes. So the very first thing we're going to do is create a new bird and store a reference to that bird in a variable of type bird named bird. Fair enough, right? So we need to resolve the right-hand side of the equal sign. And we're creating a new object using the keyword new. And notably, this is something other than int, double, byte, char. I forgot the other ones, but I have it on a slide for this week. But just a handful of things that would go on the stack. This is not one of those things, so it's going to go on the heap. Anything that's created using the keyword new, any class that we created, objects of that type, all goes on the heap. And anything that's not one of those specified values, it's all going on the heap. So we're going to create a new bird that's created on the heap. And then we're going to return a reference to it, which we're going to store in this variable. Or value, technically, in this case. So when we create a new bird, first we're going to call the constructor and take the parameters in the constructor call and create variables for the parameters and then assign them the values for the arguments. Bird doesn't take any parameters, so that amounts to doing nothing right here. And then we run all of the code that's outside of any of the methods. So here we create a value times helpful as an int. Now an int is one of those values that I always say goes on the stack. But since these ints are part of a bird object, they actually end up on the heap. So these ints are going to go on the heap as part of this bird object that we're creating. Isn't the main already in the heap space? I see the heap sign at Harloff. No, the main method will be on the stack. It'll get its own stack frame. But that's we can talk about the stack right now, actually. So the stack is right here in the debugger. This is the program stack. And most importantly, it's showing the stack frames. So here is the frame for the main method, which is sitting on line 7 right now, waiting for a return of the bird method, the constructor of the bird class method. So this is waiting right here, and the reference to this, I see what you're saying. The keyword this always stores a reference to the calling object. In this case, the object is birdbox main, And then we're calling the main method from that object. So this is storing a reference at 473 of the bird box main object, which we're not really using that for as an object in terms of OOP. We're just using that as a container for the main method. So yeah, we do have a reference to the bird box main object, but we're not using that for any purpose at this point. And then the main method call is on the stack. So when we call the main method, our program calls the main method, that goes on the stack. And then the keyword argument, or not the keyword arguments, the command line arguments go on a reference to the keyword arguments. Array is not one of those specified, goes on the stack values. So we'll get a reference to where those arguments are, where the array is on the heap. Again, we're not using that, so we don't get anything there. When we go into the bird constructor, so now we can jump over to this stack frame, which is currently on line 5, where this is executing, and this isn't waiting for another stack frame to return, so we see where it's executing and what's going on in the stack. And then we can see all the variables on the stack inside this stack frame. That includes, for right now, only a reference to the bird object that's being created. And we can see this at 477. Whenever we see this at and a number, that's our reference to the object, to an object. If you see at and then a number, you're looking at a value that is on the heap. It's somewhere in heap space that's not on the stack. So this is a reference to the bird that we're currently creating. It's an object of type bird, and it's at some 477, which is some value that's going to somehow magically be used to find this thing over in heap space. For our purposes, this means it's on the heap, and we can treat this as a reference. Whenever we see at 477, we're talking about this bird object, this exact instance of the bird class somewhere over in heap space, and it contains its variables for times helpful and times checked, which are currently being initialized to 0. So we run all the code outside of all the methods that effectively initializes this bird that's returned and stored in this bird variable. And now we can see bird stores a reference to a bird at 477. This is the exact same reference that we just had in the keyword this while we were running that constructor or running that call. I'm struggling to understand writing recursive code. Yeah, that's something. So since we're reviewing, I mean, if we get there, we can talk about that if there's a bunch of upvotes on it. But I want to at least make sure we cover LO1 and 2. What I don't know what's being referred to there. Are there situations where you could call a main? Maybe. There shouldn't be any situation where you would want to, but to be honest, I've never actually tried just calling main. You should just be able to call it like any other method, but that's typically not the way we use main. Yeah, I never really thought about that. You might be able to. Maybe it's just not the way I use main, but I don't think that would be good practice to call it. Can you explain how FP can be used for calculator? I've already explained that multiple times. Watch the past lectures. Yeah, and it's in the homework handout. Doesn't matter where you put your breakpoint. It's wherever you want to start the debugger. For this example, I want to go through everything in the program, so I put the breakpoint right at the first line of main. But if there's a lot of stuff in main that you don't want to listen to, say I'm trying to debug this method right here. I'll put the breakpoint right there, let the program run until this is first called, and then I can start debugging from there. It's whatever you're trying to debug. In this case, I'm just going through the whole example as a lecture example, so I put it at the first line of main. How do you access the bird class's variables? Yeah, let me keep going through this and we'll see. So we're in main right now. So that stack frame for the bird constructor is destroyed, and we're back in the main method. I'm creating a variable named action of type string, with the value nothing. And this is one reason why I replaced this example. I don't want to use strings for my stack and heap examples, because do strings go on the stack or the heap? Well, they behave like they're on the stack because they're not kind of not passed by reference, but they actually go on the heap. It's something I don't want to get into yet, so it's part of why I scrapped this example. But a string actually does go on the heap, and we just get a reference to that string. But I don't want to think about that yet. When we get back to functional programming and immutable objects, strings are immutable. So when we talk about immutable objects, we'll talk about strings and lists. These are two things that I avoid in my stack and heap examples in LO1, but we will talk about those. But we do have a string stored in that variable, and we're going to call bird.inDanger. That's going to put a frame on the stack, so we're away from our main frame right now. We don't have access to any of those variables, and we're inside this method where we have the keyword this storing a reference to the calling object. This is bird.inDanger. Bird stores a reference to the bird at 477. So this is going to store a reference to that bird at 477. Now we're going to access that bird's time-checked variable. This could also be, for clarity, I should put this dot. This dot times checked. Increment that by 1. And now the keyword this, the times checked, that variable has incremented. And since this is pass by reference, the pass by reference is happening through the keyword this in this case, but we pass this reference to the bird to this new stack frame by reference. When we go back to the main method and take a look at our bird, times checked has updated. This is the same exact object on the heap that we're working with, because we only gave a reference to this bird in the inDanger class. We have a reference to the same bird, so any changes we make inside this method are going to be reflected across stack frames. This is kind of how we can communicate across stack frames. So in this stack frame, I have no access to the variables in main. I can't make any changes. I'm in complete isolation from this stack frame. But since I have a reference to this bird in this stack frame, I can follow that reference to heap space, make a change, and have that change reflected in this other stack frame, because we're both following the same reference and going to the same location on the heap in heap space. So that change is reflected out here, and then we return in our other stack frame, we just return true, destroy the stack frame, but that change is reflected. We passed this bird by reference, that change is reflected. So whenever we pass by reference, any changes made to that object by following that reference into heap space by that method is going to reflect in any code in any stack frame that has that same reference, a reference to that same object. You going to extend the deadline for LQ2 application objectives since we are in makeup week? No, because that deadline was yesterday. I mean, as long as you put in an honest effort, you're going to get the extension anyway. So it will be extended. If you get the extended deadline will be a week later than I would normally put it. But the deadline itself isn't extended. Recursion talk. We'll get to recursion if we get to it. But if you want to talk about recursion, put it in the Piazza post, and if it gets a bunch of upvotes, I'll talk about recursion. I'll take what's ever most voted on that thing. I don't care what it is. Just tell me what you want. All right, so that would return true. So we're going to go into here. We're going to create a new value named action of type string and set it equal to panic. Now, at this point, we already have a variable named action on the stack. So we already have a variable named action on the stack. If we put this up here, if we said, val action, blah, 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 that's going to be an error because we have a duplicate variable name. We can't reuse a variable name. But here, since we're in a new code block, we have whenever we see a new set of parentheses, we have a new code block. So now we can use the same variable name again. So we're going to use this name action again, but it's a different variable because it's in a different block. This action is created in the if block. This action is created in the main block. So when I get that action, it's going now inside this code block. When we look for a variable named action, we're going to find this variable that points to a reference of a string with the value panic. And just for a little foreshadowing, this is at 483. This is a different, when we go back to the other action, we'll see that it's a different reference. At 483, we're going to print that to the screen. That code block ends. That variable named action is destroyed. And now that we're back in this block, this main code block, we're back to this variable named action that stores nothing. So action goes back to nothing. The reference changed back to that reference. And when we print out action, we're printing out nothing here, because this was a brand new variable named action that got panic. And once that variable is destroyed, we're back to looking at this variable. So that's code blocks and variable scoping is part of this as well. We print this out. And whenever you're debugging, you can click on the console here and see what's being printed to the screen. So we printed panic, and then we printed nothing in these two print statements. Now we're going to create a new box, and we're creating a new bird inside the constructor of this box. So the first thing that has to resolve are the arguments. So now, we resolve bird, that resolves to at 477, and we're creating a new bird, which we have to do by creating a new bird. So we're creating a bird, create its instance variables, its state variables, and now we can create the new box. We go inside the box constructor, which is going to assign bird1 and bird2 as values to references to the birds that we have. So that at 4077, the bird we've been working with, and at 874, which is the new bird that we just created. And we also have a reference to the box that's being created at 875. So again, whenever you see these ats, these are all objects on the heap, and these are references to those objects. So at this box is on the heap, at this bird is on the heap, at this bird is on the heap as well. These are all objects on the heap, and then their state variables are also on the heap associated with that object. So we create that box. There's no code outside the methods that needs to be executed. So we're going right back to our main method, and that box is going to store that box that was created. So when we said new box, that returned a reference to that box, which is at 875 in this case, and that box as its state variables stores bird references to birds on the heap, to the two birds that we've created in our program. Now we call in danger. You never seen the movie. I mean, it's probably not worth watching the movie at this point. It was big in the day and it was cool, but in hindsight, it wasn't that like a big breakthrough movie. But you'll miss the references in this example, I guess. So we're gonna say box1.inDanger. We're going to put a frame on the stack for that call of inDanger for that box. That's going to put a frame on the stack for inDanger of bird1. So now we're in inDanger in the bird class, and this is a reference to that at 477, the first bird that we created. So yeah, it was kind of boring, honestly, but it was cool in the time because like everybody on the planet was referencing it, including my lecture example after I watched it. But it was kind of a passing fad. It went pretty quick once we realized it was kind of a boring movie. But it had a lot of hype around it for some reason. So at 477, that's a reference to the bird that's calling this. Now we called this from the main method, which called the boxes in danger, which called the birds in danger. So we have 3 frames on the stack right now that are all completely independent of each other. And the calling reference here is this bird at 477. So now we have, it's times helpful times checked. This times checked is about to be incremented. And the birds are never helpful. That's why this is a val. It's always 0 because the birds in the movie are not helpful at all, even though it's the namesake of the movie. Increment times checked to 2. And we can see that effect ripple down throughout all of our code. At 477, this is an object on the heap. And in 3 different stack frames, we have references to that object. So at 477, on the boxes in danger, this method call, the stack frame for that, times check just incremented to 2. In the main method, the boxes bird1, that incremented to 2 because that's at 477. And also this bird at 477 in the bird variable, it all incremented because they're all referencing the same exact object. So that change is reflected throughout the whole program. We're going to go to our other bird and do the same thing. Times checked, increment that to 1, return true, and the birds are always chirping. It's like everything's always in danger. It's strange they named the movie after such a boring part of it, such an inconsequential part of the movie. So those birds, they both said they're in danger, so true and true is going to return true. So that stack frame resolved to true, return true to the main stack frame, box.inDanger, return true. So now we're going to execute the code in here. Now we're using the action variable again, but we're not saying val. Val or var is going to create a new value or variable. We're not using either, so now Scala is going to look for a variable named action, which it's going to find, the one that we created up here that's storing nothing currently, the string nothing. Now we're going to overwrite that with stay in the boat. Action is now stay in the boat with a new reference. And we print that to the screen. So we printed panic nothing, stay in the boat, ultimately throughout the run of this program. So that's an example of putting multiple objects on the heap and having those objects interact with each other through references. Everything we did was by reference. Whenever we're working with objects, it's passed by reference. So those changes are reflected all across the program. And if we create 2 objects, so we created this new bird here and this new bird here, they behave exactly the same, but they're going to be different. If we said box.bird1 equal box.bird2, that's always going to be false because they refer to different objects and they're compared by reference. They're different birds, so they're not equal to each other. The only way we could make those equal to each other is if we overrode the birds equals method. Then we could make them equal based on anything that we say, like we did in the health potion class. So we could override the equals method and define some case where 2 health potions are going to be considered equal. And we did that by saying if their volumes are equal, then they're equal. But if we don't override the equals method, 2 new objects are always going to not be equal because they refer to different objects on the heap. The default behavior of the equals method is to be compared by reference. Do you have to understand stack and heap memory for state design? You might be able to get away without a full understanding, but it's going to be tougher if you don't understand that your state is being passed by reference. And the state has a reference to the object to which it's attached to. You have to have some understanding of that. At the very least, passed by reference and how references are assigned. So like if I did val birdo bird equals bird. So like if I did this, and I just assign, I create a new value of type bird and just assign it this bird, I'm not creating a new bird here. So Birdo is going, and I actually happen to get 477 again. I'm just assigning that reference. This is an assignment by reference. So Birdo is effectively an alias or like a nickname to this bird. I can refer to it through each of these values. And anything I do to one of them is going to affect the other one because they are in fact referring to the same exact object on the heap, in heap space. So if you don't understand that, it's going to be tough to do the state pattern. If you don't understand pass by reference and assignment by reference like I just did. And stack and heap, especially stack, is useful for recursion. So while Scott has a good point there. Recursion. Y'all want to talk about recursion? Put it on the Piazza post. I'll talk about recursion. I'll be happy to. You know what? Let's knock another one out of here while we're at it. Can I grab this? It was called store, right? So for this lecture question, we vote please. Hey, no begging for votes. I didn't prep this one, so I got to do this off the top of my head. So we want to get all this information for the store class. So in create store as JSON, an object with keys, cache in register, and inventory, storing the appropriate information that we want. So we want to go to and from this. It's going to be a list, and this is going to be a double. So we want to go to and from list of strings, just to be clear. So we want to go to and from this code. And I gave a test case in this as well as the bonus slide. So I gave the test. You know what? Let's get this test to pass. There will be no excuse to not have this question done once I'm done here. Oops. Test store, was it? Something like that. For JSON store. If we run this, we should fail. I want to run it once just so this button, which is going to run the last thing that I've ran, I just want it so that button is going to run what I want it to run. Debugger, we can stop. And we get a type error. Good. We expect that. So as JSON, I want to convert this store objects of this type, into a JSON string. So at some point, and when I code, I don't have this fully preloaded in my RAM, so you're gonna see my more natural coding style. I'll code out of order of the actual code, but I'll code in order of my thought process. So my thought process here is at the end of this method, I'm going to have to call the stringify. Keep forgetting the import doesn't work for me. JSON, yeah, that one. Play.json, and I just want all of it. The auto import doesn't work for me so well. So I'm going to want to stringify something. I want to create an object, a JS value in stringify at some point. So some JS value, and I want some JS value, which is going to be the JSON dot as to JSON. That's going to be some I don't know, store info, and we're going to create that store info. So I want some value that's going to store all of my information, and to me it makes sense for this to be a map of strings to JS values, which is going to equal some map of cache and register. Gotta get my case right or else it won't work. Cache and register is going to store whatever's in the cache and register variable, and inventory, which is going to store anything that's in inventory. And then I have a little bit more work to do. I have to call this JSON.toJSON to get cache and register and my inventory as JS values, because right now they're Scala values. So let's get them in different values, and my method's done. Nothing more to do. So I'm creating a map of string to JS values. So I'm converting my double into a JS value and my list of strings into a JS value and mapping them from the appropriate keys. Then converting that entire thing into a JS value. I could also do this in one line if I did stringify map of to JS value, but I want to split it up a little bit. So I create a map with all the values that I want, convert that into a JS value. This is type JS value. And then I can stringify that and return this store as a string. If I want this from JS, I know I'm going to start with json.parse. I need to get this as a JS value. I'll just call it data for lack of creativity. That gets my information as a JS value. I get it as a string. I want to convert it to a JS value, which in this case is going to be a JS object. I have an object with these two keys. And I can get the values at each one of those keys using this backslash operator. So data slash, is that the right way for that slash? Yeah. If I get the cache and register and convert it to a double using the as method, as double, data inventory. I'm not screwing around. I'm going right to list of string because this library can do that. I'm not using any of my own custom types. List and string are both types that this library knows about. So screw it, I'm going right to the list of strings. And what I want to do is this dot cache and register equals this dot inventory equals. Run my test. I should see some beautiful green check marks. Test pass. Test pass. That's the exact test that I have in Autolab, so I know I got credit for that dang question. So there's your quick tutorial of that question. Did you time me? Did I solve that faster than you did? I hope so. Can we just create a variable without value like C? You can. Where would you want to? I didn't want to create a variable without a value because I was just working backwards from my thought process. But you can. It's underscore. But I wanted to name it, and then I created my value up there and then named it. Talking about RAM, something about MMO. Yeah, we're kind of doing MMO this week, but I mean, as you can see, not really. But no one knows the test in AutoGrader. But for this specific lecture question, I gave you the exact test that I used in AutoGrader. I've only done that a few times, but this was the exact test. This bonus slide. Sometimes I give bonus slides after the lecture question, the second one. This is exactly the test that I used in AutoLab. So for this one, you did know the AutoLab test. All right. I'd be remiss if I didn't do any Git, so let's at least do a little bit of it. If we take the whole week just to get through the Git slides, I'd be okay with that. In 5 minutes, version control with Git. Let's do it. So for project contribution, there are going to be at least two, probably only two. I probably won't create another one this semester. But 2 open source projects. You'll have the Git link, but you won't have access to the repository. Your goal for project contribution is to create a pull request contributing code to that project to expand its functionality or expand or improve it in some way. But how are we going to do that? So how do you usually share code? If you're working on a team with another person, how do you share code with each other? Do you send emails back and forth? Do you do what I actually did earlier today is I created a zip file and sent it over Slack, not the way we were supposed to share code. Do you just submit to AutoLab? What do you do? Go to Google Docs is a decent option if you have to edit the code at the same time. All those are pretty bad options. We're going to use Git. This is a version control software which is made for handling code. It's going to track your versions, the namesake version control. You've used software before where it says this is version whatever, notably Scala and Java this semester. So this is how we can keep track of those versions. And it's also source control, which is probably the bigger reason why it's so widely used, is in between versions, it can control the source code, all of the code for our program, which is the namesake of the SRC folder. That's where all your source code goes. That's all the code that is your program. So we use Git for this. Git is non-central repository, meaning that on GitHub we store one repository that is backed up on those servers, and then when you work on the project, you create an entire copy of that repository on your machine to be able to work with. Then you can make changes to that repository using some keywords. Clone you've used, pull you've used. What we're going to do in the project is use add, commit, and push. Add will probably be hidden to you, but we'll definitely see commit and push through the IntelliJ interface. I'm going to get to... So GitHub, you've seen for the homeworks for the examples repo. I'm storing those repos on GitHub, and then you're able to clone and pull from those repos. You cloned the repo once to get a copy of it, and then like for the examples repo, every time I add a new example to it and you want to get that new example, you pull from the repository. So GitHub is not, importantly, GitHub is not Git. Git is the version control software. GitHub is a server that's storing Git repositories. So there's one big issue that needs to be solved is, great, we have this shared repository, but if I'm pushing code and you're pushing code and we're both changing kind of the same things, we can really affect each other's process and we can break each other's code, and it's just not a good thing. So what we do is create branches, which is effectively a copy of the entire code base in a separate environment that doesn't affect the code elsewhere. So if you have 3 branches in a repository, you have 3 copies of the code base that can all be in different states. So we could have one branch for the actual state of the project, and then I could have a branch where I'm working, you can have a branch where you're working, and we can both work independently of each other without each other's changes breaking, affecting each other's workflow. So we create branches to work independently. And then when we're done, we're going to merge our code back into the main branch. So once we're done with our code, we merge that branch into the main repository, the main branch, and then that code is part of the project after that. You know what? I'm not even doing this justice. There's no point in going through this fast. Maybe I'll just do Git for the rest of the week and just do it slowly, or we can just spend this week reviewing, and I'll do these 3 lectures later in the semester. For those who do want this, maybe I will go through this a little bit. I'll just go through this last picture. So when a repository is first created, you're going to have one master branch, and this is typically what we use for the major releases of the software or any release to customers. We're also going to create a develop branch, which is the latest features of the code base that are not necessarily released to users. And then off of develop, we're going to create feature branches, which is where we actually write our code. We'll write our code on these branches and then merge them into develop. And when it's time to make a release to the customers, we'll merge them back into master. So you should create a feature branch, write your code, and then merge to develop. But wait, you don't have access to the repository for this, for the project contribution. So for this is where forks come in. This is a GitHub thing where you make a complete copy of the repository on your GitHub account. And then you can work on that repository and then create what's called a pull request back into the main repository. So this is how we work on open source projects. If you want to contribute to an open source project that you don't have access to, you'll fork that repository, which is kind of like creating a new branch, but completely separate from the original repository, and work on your code there, and then request that your code be added back into the main project. And then the maintainers of that project will decide if your code is worthy and acceptable to be added to that project or not, and they'll either accept or reject your pull request. So that's what you have to do for the project. And when it comes time, I'll go through demos of the whole thing, creating a fork of the repo, cloning that repo in IntelliJ, making changes, pushing to your fork, and then creating the pull request back into my project to be able to add that contribution back in. And here's the procedure that I just talked about. And pull request demos when I have that. 8 upvotes. Ooh, what are we doing? This will probably be doing next week. Recursion. I see a lot of people saying how confusing it is. But not many asking for help. 8 upvotes. Perfect. Got something. That's not super specific, but I can come up with more recursion examples. And I did intend to just focus on LO1 and LO2, but hey, that's what the people want. Who am I to disagree? If the people who are further behind than recursion, I assume they're just not paying attention. They're probably not showing up to live lecture. They probably haven't checked their email. You know, there's a reason why they're behind. And gel, that's what you were talking about. Everybody writes in different colored gel pens, so you know who edited what. Oh boy, don't do that. But I mean, if you do that and it works for you. Did I miss anything in here? Is there any way to append to a list without making it var? Not really. Not unless you use a mutable list, which is not something I'll show in this class. We will talk when we talk about linked lists. I'll show you exactly why that has to be a var, and we'll go into depth on that. Wasn't week 12 supposed to be WebSockets? No, week 11 is WebSockets, I believe. Maybe 12. Maybe I messed up the numbering. I mean, if I did, I'll fix it. But yeah, week 7, that pushed this back to 8. 9 and 10 is data structures. 11 and 12. Yeah, no, 11 was supposed to be WebSockets. Now it's 12. And then week 12 was supposed to be what we're covering right now. Well, covering, I'll put that in quotes. I don't know how much we're going to cover. But if we gotta use this review week for the topics that we're supposed to do this week, That's fine too. Honestly, I could probably push back MMO architecture. This is more just like nice to know stuff. It brings all the topics of the course together, but I never really test you on that. So it's more of just there for the top students who've been tracking all semester to give them something that, holy crap, this is what I can build now. Yeah, you can build a real-time MMO by the end of this semester, but with the things that you know. The things that we cover in 116 these days. Make a poll, get a review. Oh yeah, for the topics I wanted to make a poll. It crossed my mind, but it's like, what do I put for the options? The whole point is I don't know what you're all wanting, where you're all lost. Where did I lose you? That's what I need to know. And I'm not just going to put every topic in the course on a poll. I know you're talking about something else there, but I did, because I'd rather have a poll for what should we review, but just too many options. And we create a PR to Jesse. Git is very important. Yeah, Git isn't... So out of this week, Git is the one thing that you will need to know. Absolutely. At the very least for this semester, you'll need to use Git to do your project contribution. And next semester in 220, you're going to use Git for every assignment. I've been contemplating using Git for every assignment in 116 as well. Maybe someday. But you'll use it in every assignment there. And just for the rest of your career, you're going to be using Git. It's possible you'll work somewhere that uses a different type of version control, but you'll be hitting the same ideas of pushing, pulling, branching, merging. All those concepts are critically important. And Git kind of is the dominating software for version control right now, so it's most likely going to be Git. GUIs, it's you'll probably work with GUIs at some point too, but this is Java and Scala specific, so it might not be the most beneficial thing unless you can see past that and look at the concepts. Which the concepts are actually event-based architecture concepts, which we have 2 weeks on later in the semester. So I'm not too concerned with that. MySQL, yeah, you'll probably connect to databases at some point in your careers as well. But there's no rush. MVC is going to be nice to know. I want to make sure I get to that as well, because most of the homework assignments follow the MVC architecture. So I like going through that lecture so I can explain to you, look, this is how the homeworks are set up. Even though you can do the homeworks without fully understanding why they're split into model, view, and controller folders, but it's nice to get the actual explanation of why. So yeah, there's a way to do that, but doing HTML, yeah, you're talking about Java docs. You can do Java docs and in Scala. That might be super easy. In Java, you just do the right notation right there, and then you can do if I want to list, yeah, and you can start throwing HTML in there, and then it'll produce your docs for you. Yeah, we can do the same thing in Scala. Can work on a 116 crash course. Yeah, exactly. I'll grudge. I'll maybe I won't even go through those slides again, but I'll give a demo on it, because most of those things I just said, even especially with how fast I went through it, but they won't make sense until you see it in with an actual project. Maybe I'll only do demos after this. Yeah, there is a computer science crash course. Oh, yeah, it is. I got it sitting on my desk, UB Marcos. I actually just broke it, and I'm trying to casually fix it while I'm talking, and it's not working. Oh, no, it's legit broken. Well, I guess that finger won't get strengthened anymore. 1-2 is main issue. Lecture question 1-2, because nobody's even suggested that on Piazza yet. That was even one of my examples, because that's where I think a lot of people are behind. Like, a lot of the class just got stuck on 1-2 and haven't gotten past that yet. But if nobody requests that, I'll assume those people who are stuck on it are just giving up. Like, you gotta work with me, at all. Because if I go over that and the people who are stuck on that aren't even showing up to lecture or watching the videos, what's the point? If the only people paying attention to the course right now are the ones who are stuck on recursion or caught up with everything, then I'm going to talk about recursion. It's simple as that. Yeah, you will try your best this week. Yeah, make that post for 1-2. If that's what you're stuck on, at least make the post. And if other people are stuck on the same thing, maybe they just don't want to post it, but maybe they'll upvote it. It's worth a try. Because 1-2 and 1-3 are tricky, especially for that part of the course. Those are very tricky questions that come early, and I'm surprised at the lack of questions I have on those two, especially compared to the submissions. Like, a lot of people still haven't even submitted 1-2. Like, if you're stuck on that, ask about it. We're here to help. Is an immutable list just an array? Not quite. There are differences. An array is a continuous block of memory. A list can shrink and grow in terms of number of elements. Zianatri, in those cases, as long as your demo goes well with the TA, here one of two things is going to happen. Clearly, you've gotten the extension. If you're that far in the assignment, you're going to get the extension. So one of two things will happen during your demo. Either everything that the TA asked for works great, in which case I'm most likely going to overlook, depending on the specifics, I'm going to overlook the Autolab because it's just going to be some obscure bug. I'm not going to make you spend tens of hours or whatever hunting down that one bug. Or two, the TA is going to ask you something, you're going to do it, and your calculator is going to be clearly broken, and then you know what you have to test. You know exactly what you did wrong. You can fix that and then go to the makeup interview and get it done. So either way, don't sweat about it. Don't stress until... just don't stress. Just go into the interview prepared, and you'll be good. So is there a way to override constructors in HTML page of instructions? I'm not quite sure what you're saying anymore there. I thought you were talking about Java docs. But to override constructors in HTML page of instructions, I don't know. I don't know what you mean. You can overload constructors by making multiple constructors with different parameter lists. And actually, I don't even think you can do that in Scala. There's not a simple way to do it except by having a companion object and do that with apply methods. But I'm guessing that's what you're talking about in Java, where you have overloaded constructors with Java docs for each one. That's my guess. Any tips on 3.2? Which one's 3.2? 3.2. Merge, sort, and recursion was the Fibonacci. Use recursion. Any tips on 3.2 besides use recursion? Because that's right here. So to compute the nth Fibonacci number, it's the sum of the n-1 and n-2 Fibonacci numbers. So if you just recursively call your Fibonacci, your fib method on n-1 and n-2 and add those together, That's the answer for fib of n. So that's your recursive step. That's the logic of how to write this method by just assuming that the method already works. And as long as your base cases are always reached and your base cases are correct, then you good. Yeah, do a weather app with the GUI and JSON. Do it. Side projects. So, let me just scan this and I'll leave you with this thought. GUIs. Yeah, GUIs and... actually talking at a very high, like the user level. We're talking about GUIs in 442 today. But working on side projects like that, I think that's the best way to learn computer science. Like you can only learn so much by going through a course like this and by doing the assignments that I dreamed up and listening to my lectures and my colleagues and going through all our courses. You're only going to learn so much. I think the best way to learn computer science, at least after you've learned the basics, so at the point where you're at right now for 116 students, not the 442 students, or hey, 442, if you don't know stuff yet, you can follow this advice too, is to work on your own project. Just come up with an idea and try to turn it into software. Try to create some software based on that idea. For me personally, I was going through the motions and kind of learning computer science, but nothing really made sense until I was interested in race car physics and the dynamics of a race car going through a corner and how the weight distributes to the, if you're taking a left-hand corner, the weight distributes to the right-hand corner and depends, or the right side, and it depends on all the geometry of your suspension. I was really interested in that stuff at the time. So I just said, well, I'm learning programming and I like this stuff and I know the math behind it. And I said, I'm just going to write a program that computes a car going through a turn with a certain number of g-force with a certain amount of banking with these parameters for the spring, the strength of the spring and the dampeners on each of the four corners. This is how the weight is going to transfer throughout that corner over time. And I just wrote software to simulate that. I learned more about software. Passing by reference was a big thing that I needed to know. Like I have this function, I need to change some things, but I need those changes to be reflected in my main method and my other methods. And I don't want to pass 1,000 parameters all the friggin' time every time I call these methods, because that's going to get tedious. Oh, pass by reference? That's why we do that. Holy crap, it hit me like a ton of bricks. It was awesome. Arrays, array indexing, things like that. None of it really made sense as to why we do any of that stuff until I felt the pain of not doing them, and everything just made so much more sense after I did that. I recommend that to anybody. Just take anything you're interested in and think of how software could help with that. Any like a simulation, like I talked about, or anything that can help you, and just try to build the thing. Even if you don't really build it, like my program was never useful. It never accurately simulated physics. But man, I learned a lot about programming. Yeah. Heather from Nintendo? Hell yeah. Making especially if it's something that makes your life easier. Like I write so much software for my job right now, just mostly to process information for the class and keep everything going right. Managing grade books and processing rosters and things like that. I write a lot of software just to keep my life easier.